And I'll go one step further than this. Pretty much everyone listening to this, and you and I, when we were 4 or 5 years old,
Mm-hmm.
given the same opportunity, would have done it with freedom and laughed and
Yeah.
felt joy. My experience when we release that terror is a return to innocent joy.
Mm. Great.
Literally, it's like when we stopped playing and singing like that, we lost our joy. And people are spending a lot of money on a lot of things as adults, really trying to find meaning and joy in life. And it's lying kind of straight in front of us.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you are watching or listening. This is the Holistic Monitor, and I'm your host, Nick Sconia. The Holistic Monitor is a wellness podcast featuring life energy research, health and wellness transformation, self-improvement and empowerment, philosophy, spirituality, and now guest interviews as well. We look forward to your comments on our YouTube channel at Holistic Monitor, and you can also listen on the go with us at Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and more. And with that, let's get today's show started.
In today's episode, we're excited to have Jeremy de Tolly as our special guest. Jeremy is a communication coach with a unique approach that combines energy coaching, tension and trauma releasing exercises, the emotional freedom technique, and other trauma-informed somatic therapies to help individuals overcome their fears of being seen and heard. Through his work, he has helped hundreds of people to show up authentically and lead with ease. On top of being a master in communication, Jeremy is also an award-winning musician. He won the South African Music Award for Best Alternative Album and is a singer, guitarist, pianist, and studio producer. We take a deep dive into Jeremy's journey and learn how to conquer our fears and express ourselves with confidence. We discuss what the power of better communication has for ourselves and the global community. So sit back, pause, and please welcome Jeremy de Tolly. So Jeremy de Tolly, overcoming shyness, social anxiety, and fear of being seen and heard, creating trust and connection when communicating, showing up authentically as a leader, facilitator, or influencer, overcoming tone deafness and a fear of singing, and using communication to improve relationships. Does that all sound like the things that you cover?
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Absolutely. Those are all reasonable, a reasonable description. If I was to summarize it, I think it would be really about helping people feel completely comfortable and safe in their own skin when around other human beings. So really able to have both boundaries and really be firm and clear, but also to be connected and warm and heart-centered. And also, I'm going to say, to be conscious.
Right.
Let's call it awake and present around each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm working on actively listening. That's being present in the moment and listening, hearing what the other party has to say, and trying to make clear, informed questions or responses to what I'm hearing.
Great. Yeah, that's absolutely part of this practice too, is active or very present or even quiet listening. So in other words, becoming empty and still and just receiving the other person and clearing out the mind and potential replies, resting all of that while the other person speaks and just receiving.
Right. And what inspired you to become a communication coach? If I could say you're a communication coach, yeah.
Yeah, that'll work. So I've studied as a trauma facilitator and a transformation coach, and I've done a lot of trauma work and mentoring people, let's just say, into wellness.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also a singer and a performer, but I've also had aspects of social anxiety and all kinds of awkwardness in my life too. And really this thing about the voice and self-expression kind of just has lit me up. And call it this confluence of healing and trauma and consciousness on the one side and voice and self-expression is really just my jam. It's where I ignite, let's just say.
Excellent. And you're a lead singer I think I saw a
Yeah,
video of you doing an Elvis tune or something like that. Is that right?
uh, that one I can't get rid of on the internet. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Still there.
yeah, it's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've performed on a lot of big stages in my life, and I'm sure I still will, but have gone through all of the self-judgment after showing up on those stages or feeling
Mm.
my throat close, um, all of the things. Just had a real wild and human journey with this voice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. That's awesome. And so you started out in kind of closed off, with shyness, that sort of thing. You started in that place, or is this
Yeah,
something that was natural for you?
I would say I was an introvert extrovert, so a real combination, but would suffer from what I would call enormous shame hangovers
Mm.
after being in groups, and actually would become tongue-tied and lose my words and say stupid stuff, which I now really associate with dropping into a bit of a freeze response in groups of people, like social groups, that kind of thing.
Right.
So I've kind of experienced all of it, really. Inability to express boundaries, and really kind of express authentically what was going on inside me. All of the things which I, of course, now really share with people how to do powerfully. Because when we can't express ourselves like that, we have a massive disconnect between what we're expressing out in the world and what's going on inside us. And that can be very lonely. And it can also be, well, it sabotages real connection.
And what are some of the like common fears that people have with communication?
Yeah, so look, I mean, certainly the people that I often end up working with, call them clients and students in my courses, may have been brought up, for example, in a household where we don't express emotions.
Mm.
Just kind of stiff upper lip that thing. I don't want to see
Mm-hmm.
you cry. There are other kids that have got it worse. Really essentially being gaslighted by their parents or emotionally unavailable parents. So very quickly learning to shut down emotionally and bottle feeling. So there's
Mm.
that all the way through to families where there was abusive expression and really kind of wow, and the only way it could be heard, and maybe among a lot of siblings, was everyone had to be on level 9,000 high octane expression, or you just weren't even being heard. So for them, just to, when they think that they're speaking reasonably, most people think that they're shouting. So it'll be what I call a huge range of people, from too little voices, people who freeze around other people when they need to express what they need to do. Perhaps they're in a group and they find themselves shutting down, or becoming tongue-tied, all the way through to the people who always speak first, tend to be really bombastic. I often find they will be right up at the camera on a Zoom session, taking up
Right.
quite a lot of space.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they get rejected because they take up too much space and they are too much. And
Right.
so really teaching, let's just call it a kind of a beautiful middle way in all of this, to be present, to be able to take part, to be able to make space for other human beings, and then create safety and connection in the way that one expresses oneself.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that middle way, that balance between, the two opposing forces. That's definitely something that, you see a lot. You have very quiet people, and then you also have very, uh, uh, you know, room-inspired, driven people that are just on top, and, too much for some people to handle. You get a lot, I
Exactly.
guess, of that. Now, regards to your training, emotional freedom technique, the EFT, is that something that you're actively doing is it
Yeah,
part of the
yeah, I've trained
practice?
in it absolutely. Yeah, I'm a clinical EFT practitioner amongst other forms of EFT that I've trained in, but equally transformation coaching and energy healing, which I was my original training was in energy healing, and then went into much deeper trauma-informed practices over the last decade, let's say.
Right, right. And uh, so in those techniques, the somatic therapies, is that would be what they're called? And could you explain what somatic, what that means, or how that's approaching the person?
Yeah, absolutely. So somatic therapies are, let's say, body-oriented therapy. So somatic psychology, for example, would include, we're not just talking about the contents in the upstairs department, we're also talking about Well, when you think that particular thought, what goes on in your body? And of course, there are feelings in there, and our emotions are experienced in the body, as there's a sensation that accompanies pretty much every single emotion. So, somatic therapies ask us to really integrate what's happening in the body with what's happening mentally, to be one organism, you could say. And then literally, there's a symphony of sensation going on in our bodies all the time. And any healing practice that completely ignores the body is missing kind of like half of the picture. And I think it's pretty much impossible to heal at a very fundamentally deep level without incorporating the body. Just my 50 cents worth, 500 cents worth.
Right. Hey, you got to do the whole person, from spirit,
Exactly.
mental, emotional, physical, to really address issues that somebody might have. Um, and as far
Agreed.
as, you talked about it a little bit in the beginning there about communication and how it can increase a person's ability to work with society at large. The benefits for more clear and concise communication and active listening and whatnot. Um, you could see that throughout the world as a benefit. Is this something
Mhm.
that you see, or maybe that like leaders of countries do? Is it something that they practice, or is it definitely something that they should practice? Um, do you know if that is something that they get coached on themselves? Is that like a part and parcel of being a leader?
Yeah, it's absolutely a part and parcel of being a politician and a leader. And the ones that succeed, I think, get some level of coaching. And really,
Yeah.
the ones that really, really kind of take up the big stages will have worked on their so many different things, from their filler words to their hand gestures, every last little bit of body language, the scripting and the messaging. I mean, it's a very, involved science, you could even say. And that's more potentially on the level of persuasion.
Mm,
Um, Really, what this is about is being the most deeply myself that I can be, being able to really show up as myself comfortably and safely and powerfully in the world, uh, to be a kind of an authentic light, let's just call it, rather than a persuader. What I will say, though, is it's quite persuasive to see someone who is deeply, warmly comfortable in their own skin. There's a kind of a charm to it, an authentic, powerful, attractive charm to it, without it becoming manipulative, let's just say, because I think it can be a dark art in the wrong hands,
right.
politically, for example.
That and it can seem unnatural if somebody's trying to, right, even in the persuasion, that can turn a lot of people off because it's a little less authentic, more more driving towards somebody's personal desires for power or something like that. Speaking can be one of those things where it really drives many people in a direction, or it gives it drives maybe emotion in the listeners.
Mm.
With the audience, if you're on stage singing, depending on the type of music or song that you're singing, can definitely change the vibe of the room. And the
Mm.
same with speaking, you'll get that same change depending on what's being said, how it's being said.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
did you
Mm.
ever incorporate this, or was this as far as when you were in a very popular band uh, prior? Was this something that came about after that, or was this incorporated within your work when you were doing music like that?
Yeah, I would say that at that time I was, even when I was performing, even in touring and stuff, I still was an energy healer and coach, and then trauma facilitator. I mean, the two roads had to part at some point. Rock and roll and healing are
Right.
an unusual combination, and it became a bit difficult having them together. But I'd say that really what I do now is completely informed by the experience of being on those stages.
Okay.
Uh,
So
yeah.
that was like the foundation or groundwork that build up to what you're doing now. Okay,
Mm.
that makes sense. And
Mm.
as far as for people learning to do these techniques, what does that entail? Like, what is the typical one of your typical clients? What are their experiences in the beginning? Like, how do they get started? That sort of thing.
Okay, so let's take an example. Let's just say someone who has got a trauma history. They've done a bit of personal work. Sometimes I work with psychotherapists and coaches to help them too. But let's just say it's a person off the street with a freezing issue, and they really want to be able to show up in meetings, but their experience is it's like everyone's talking on top of each other. They can't get in. They feel frozen. It feels like everyone talks on top of them. They feel really invisible and unheard, and they really judge themselves for that too. And it's very frustrating because they feel like they've got all these thoughts and ideas, it's like trapped inside them, and they feel incredibly invisible and unseen. So let's just say that. So I'll start working with them, and immediately, even in the first call, let's just say it's you and I working and you're the freezer. What we'll just start doing is they'll generally, even because they're suddenly we're talking about their stuff and it's really personal, there'll be stuff going on in their body right from the beginning of the call.
Right.
And so I'll get them to start noticing, okay, so what does it feel like right now talking to me? And then they'll start tuning in. Oh, well, I feel scared and I feel a bit anxious and I feel tingly in my solar plexus. Like we'll really get somatic about where these things are, because without this information, you can't shift the pattern. So when we start really diving into that, and then we'll start practicing regulating their nervous systems, you could say, turning or deconditioning that pattern. So, for example, we'll play, like I'll say, okay, well, turn your video off. Let's just see. And they turn their video off, and I'm sitting there. They can see me, but they're hidden. And like, how do you feel? It's like, oh, I feel this enormous sense of relief. I feel safe. Okay, so I want you just to remember that feeling. We're going to set that as a baseline, because I want you to feel like that, not only around me, but we're going to set that as your baseline with everybody when you go into a group. And if you're not feeling that way, always be regulating yourself. In other words, helping your nervous system down-regulate out of anxiety into calm, grounded, warm, connected presence. If you're not feeling calm, grounded, warm, connected presence, then find your way there using these strategies. And so then we'll start using a whole bunch of somatic and mindfulness or presence-based strategies and heart-centeredness and a whole series of, let's call them angles in, which really can turn into one whole kind of way of being around people. I developed a process called the Radiant Voices process that includes these different elements. Like, for example, just one of the elements will be around presence, and that might involve really becoming more present, so mindfully awake, you could say, but equally might involve things like using eye contact or kind of, let's just say, a diffuse sense of being aware of your whole visual field to bring a sense of calm. You know, what might be called sky gazing in Buddhism is the sense of using your peripheral awareness. So some people, I'll teach them to do that when they walk into a room. Right. Rather than the eyes darting around and looking, scanning, in fear. In other words, really in there, in an adrenalized state, we then down regulate back into calm. Anyway, so that's a short version.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, so that's very practical, which is, very helpful. So people can kind of get a ground to it where they're able to really stabilize themselves emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically. Going into a room, that's a great example. I think beyond just speaking, for a lot of people, shyness and being overwhelmed is as simple as going to a party or going into a group of people. That can be like an everyday occurrence for some people, to be anxious about the event that's coming up, and that will change their whole day until that event happens. And then usually people go in there and it's not a big deal unless it's a speaking occasion, in which case, until they've surpassed that point where they're done with the speak or with the announcement or whatever it might be. But that's a very good grounded approach to just kind of go in. I think somebody said, go into a room as if you own it, like as if you own the place. Walk in and just have that sense of, it's very hard to get to that mindset, I think. your approach sounds a lot more grounded and realistic as far as how you're looking at the room, to recognize that we use our eyes to see and evaluate our situation as, human animals. We need to see
Mm.
if we're being attacked. We need to look around and, find if there's a foe within the group or somebody that we don't want to see. So just kind of leveling that out a little bit and kind of saying, all right, you're fine, you're safe. Go into the room, gaze, be aware of the whole space. That kind of gives you that gaze of feeling safe, protected. I like that.
Yeah.
That's really great. That's fantastic.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I mean that's again just one small one of the many techniques.
Right.
But yeah, it can completely change someone's experience of what I'm going to call default conditioning or default wiring. In other words, they've been feeling that anxiety every
Mm-hmm.
time they walk into a room full of people, probably since they were a teenager. And to spend your entire life walking into a group of people, generally feeling somewhat unsafe, is not a really pleasant way to interact with the world. But no one
Right.
told me that I had options, I had
Right.
choices, and that I could rewire.
Yeah, exactly. No, and you do have choices. We do get locked into patterns from when we're, like you said, in family. Our family dynamic kind of sets along a certain pattern. Some say like the oldest child, the youngest child, the middle child, that sort of thing. But it has a lot to do with conditioning. Um,
Mm.
so you go back as well to work with earlier experiences and try and clear that trauma from the person. Is that part of the technique that you do?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like exactly as you say, the core conditioning or experiences or developmental wounding that can happen from really when someone's a baby. So you either, maybe you've got a mother who's overwhelmed and she can't handle her baby's tears. And really, really, really quickly, that child learns that when I cry, I lose mommy's love.
Hmm.
And the knock-on effects on that child will be catastrophic in her self-expression system. Or a
Right.
father who comes home from work and he is grumpy and not unavailable, whichever it
Right.
is. The patterns start when we're really young, and then they usually then kind of double down at school. In a way, I must say, usually what happens at school is there's this kind of see, here's the proof. Whatever
Hmm.
happened and started to be laid down as conditioning as a kid in your family home, then kind of gets proven. See in the real in the whole world. Now, every time you walk into a situation like that, I'm going to get bullied. I'm going to get shut down, and so on. And then those patterns, as you called them, exactly, just keep mirroring really for the rest of a life unless they're turned around. And they're really not that difficult to turn around. It's just that bizarrely on planet Earth, there hasn't been that much focus on healing or communication patterning. I mean, honestly, I'm involved with a research professor from the University of Memphis, and we've structured some of the first research around emotions and voice and feelings of shutdownness or not, because there's no data on it. No one's
Right.
ever bothered to research it before.
That's wild. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's such an important thing for how the world operates because it's the
Mm.
interactions of all of us together, that having a better approach to ourselves will lead to a better approach to those around us. Um, but yeah, the feedback loop that gets started with one idea, it's part of the mechanism of our brain to do that, to basically take a situation, learn from it, double down on it over and over again, and then unfortunately to look for it out in the world and find it, which it will, and it'll associate that same beginning experience with this new experience as if it's one and the same. And that feedback loop is definitely very toxic, because it doesn't allow
Absolutely.
that freedom that we want from um, our actions and our when we go into a public space, we want to be able to feel like we can do it. Well, I don't know about everybody, but we want to be able to feel like we can do whatever needs to be done to be free to express ourselves emotionally, mentally. Do you find that, and you've worked with a lot of different groups of people, is it typically people that are engaged in speaking with others, like as far as leadership roles that you work with?
I mean, I work with a broad range. I would say one of the primary focuses around influencers and leaders, but I also work with some very, very detailed trauma cases. Work with a bunch of trauma cases where it can be severe trauma will have shut down a voice in a particular way, and it requires just the right kind of clinical approaches to help that person learn to feel safe again in the world, to express themselves. So I'm going to just say it's a range. But then what I tend to do is when I work with groups, I have a course called Awaken Your Radiant Voice, which is really aimed at people who feel compromised or shut down in their expression. And there I work with really all the too much to the too little to the hybrid voices. And they come in as a group, and we let's just say we heal together. It's very, very healing for people to be around people who feel the same. Oh, you mean I'm not the only one? Right. Oh, I'm not defective. Oh, we're all feeling this. Okay, we can do this. And then, really healing takes place, and a lot of practicing too.
Right. And what is the name of that course?
Awaken Your Radiant Voice.
That's great. Does it involve singing, or is it more on the level of just communicating with one another?
It's actually both. I have a thesis where I often refer to it as whole voice. If you look at traditional cultures in general, people speak and sing, and they tend to sing a lot communally. Right. I come from South Africa, where certainly a traditional Black South African culture sings all the time together, communally, in ritual, in family, and so on. And no one doesn't sing. There's no such thing as a non-singer in that culture. Whereas in Western culture, singers are those people, and then the rest of us must watch and applaud. And this loss of collective, communal singing joy, I think, is a massive loss of humanity, a sense of humanity and connectedness in Western culture. So within Awaken Your Radiant Voice, we do a ton of speaking and boundaries and unfreezing and really speaking a lot, but we also work through whatever shame, shut down, I think I'm tone deaf, all of that stuff in the course, because singing and reducing shame and singing to the point of finding joy again actually then turns this vessel, this voice, into a source of inspiration, freedom, joy, unexpectedness, wildness, play. And that really allows a kind of a sense of music and spontaneity, let's just say, to pour through even the speaking voice. And so there's a dynamic, alive, uncontained speaking and singing voice is really what we're aiming for. It's just a human being that can express and feels free to do so.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the singing part, that I think probably terrifies a lot of people. But
it really does. It really, really does. I mean, I'm always scared. When you ask me about it, is sometimes I'm scared to mention it because it can be. Western people in general have such radical resistance about it, and I work with that. Like I've worked with. I'm going to say that in a lot of Western people, if you dig down, if you ask them, they'll just say, "I don't sing. Why not? Well, I don't really like it. Whatever." Great. If I'm working with them directly and they're put on the spot to then make noise come out of that voice, what will be underneath the surface of that nonchalant, it's just not my thing, is basically blind terror.
Blind terror. Right.
Yeah.
Without a source.
And it's at a level of mortal blind terror in the bodies that's mostly unrecognized, never been seen before. And so we work with freeing that. I personally think it's a multi-generational, cultural, like culture-wide wound in Western Europe, kind of post-European culture. The loss of our voices, and I think it's a massive, massive wound. I think we lose a huge amount of our humanity and our collective joy and even connection through not singing together.
That's amazing. Yeah. And just the freedom from that terror, that
would be
amazing, right? It's got to be transformative in itself just to be able to overcome. I think a lot of people do sing, but they sing to themselves or with only themselves in the audience, in the car, in the shower.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's still a thing where people sing in the shower, but in the car, to the radio, to a song that they know privately, and maybe with one or two other people, they'll belt something out. And I could be wrong. Maybe there's a lot of people that just don't do anything at all. But I feel like a lot of people sing along to songs. They have their own level of comfort, but when it entertains the idea that they would have to be the one that people are focused on, I think that's the part where people get lost in thinking too much, maybe.
Well,
That trauma comes
I
in,
so did you say where trauma comes
You're
in?
right. Possibly.
Exactly. Yeah, I was.
Speaking up, that can be don't speak up, It could be part
No,
and parcel to
absolutely.
their issue.
Yeah, because as you said, thinking too much is one level of it, but then at least you brought in then the trauma. It's an embodied fear. Like the whole body goes. If I ask pretty much anyone who listens to this, and we were sitting in a group together, and I asked them to sing, just
Right.
sing something in front of the 5 or 10 people in that Zoom room, and we could all then talk about what was happening in their body, there would be just a ton of fear flooding their body.
Right. Right.
And if they were paying attention, it'd be like, I can feel my throat closing, my heart's beating really fast, my palms are sweating,
Right.
um, my solar plexus is clenching and my belly's turning upside down and I feel nauseous.
Right.
But
An amazing reaction. An
it's
amazing reaction
incredible.
to one suggestion.
Yeah.
Start
Yeah.
sweating, lock up. That's pretty wild. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll go one step further than this. Pretty much everyone listening to this, and you and I, when we were 4 or 5 years old,
Hmm.
given the same opportunity, would have done it with freedom and laughed and
Yep.
felt joy. My experience when we release that terror is a return to innocent joy.
Mm. Right.
Literally, it's like when we stopped playing and singing like that, we lost our joy. And people are spending a lot of money on a lot of things as adults, really trying to find meaning and joy in life. And it's lying kind of straight in front of us.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Amazing to be able to, hear that and know that there's a way to gain that kind of personal power and strength back.
Mm,
I don't know if you work with chakra balancing at all or anything like that, but it's all like the throat chakra. It's all of this vocal intensity, the throat chakra that locks, that prohibits us from accessing these higher realms within ourself, without inhibits us from connecting to our higher self, as it were.
mm,
Um, but a lot of people get locked in. They get locked into the lower spectrum of thinking, of survival, of
mm,
food, with necessity. Of course, with a lot of people, it's very necessity, a very necessary place to be is thinking about their survival.
mm,
But that personal power comes in, and for a lot of people, it kind of stops there. That's basically where they get locked. The advancement to emotional freedom, the heart chakra, seems to be a difficult point for a lot of people to express
mm,
love, to express themselves in a way emotionally that would unlock that. I think through the voice as a channel is a great way to kind of break free of the binds that people get afraid to speak about emotions or emotional consciousness, and just they are an emotional being. They're a speaking being, all of these things, this expression within themselves. But there's these locks that get put in. And like you said, from the trauma, early life trauma, finding those locks, putting the right key to it, unlocking them, that can give us our voice back, you know. And what a powerful
yeah.
thing to be able to go to work and have your voice be in power with your voice and be able to do whatever job it is more effectively. That's why I say, like, globally, the the strength in having that freedom of your voice back is just amazing. To be able to communicate with others how you're feeling, your needs, your wants, I
Yeah.
think it's just, if both parties are doing it, I think it's an amazing thing. Um,
Yeah, I love I'm glad you brought it back to energetics. Let's just say I definitely used to speak much more in terms of chakras and energy, and I just because I work with such a wide range of people of different belief systems, I just keep it somatic and physical and
right,
psychological, but
right,
really it's the same. And as you were saying, it's an incredible portal or gateway sitting right here.
yeah,
Take all of our emotional life, all the complexity of what happens in us, and put, like, imagine like a cork bottle stopper right here. So it all gets stuck down here. What happens? I get angry, but no, there's a
yeah,
block here. All of that anger then has to stay inside the body.
right,
And the same with depression and sadness. When it's not shared, when we don't express, it is deeply, deeply unhealthy for us. And so, really, I just really wanted to kind of jump in and kind of say that and agree with you, really, that I think that what lies here is the most extraordinary potential for our evolution. As we open this up to more authentic expression, this particular place, our throat, is just the most extraordinary doorway, let's just say, to being deeply present, to
yeah,
being heart centered, to really living a more evolved, fulfilling, and happy life. Does that make
yeah.
sense?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean,
So,
it's one of our
yeah.
powers as a species that's not, another mammal, is our ability to
Mm.
have this strong communication level, aside from like the thumbs, It's one of our
Mm.
strengths is to be able to communicate in such a way that, we're able to bring large groups together, you know. Um, it's, we get locked in, and you're right, in a lot of, you don't hear a lot of, it's more entertainment value here in America for sure, and probably everywhere it's entertainment value, but it's looked at as only entertainers doing singing. Somebody that's being an
Yeah.
entertainer, they're being something different than just themselves. They have to be a different role,
Yeah.
when really it's
Well,
that
often
person.
when I yes, sorry. When I look at the US, I think one of the sort of interesting things about, let's just say, US politics, um, is that, and this is not specifically about politics, but it's more about one of the reasons for me why the, um, for example, the evangelical churches in the States
Hmm.
by mistake happened to work with one of the biggest social glues you
Mm.
can ever work with, which is collective singing
Mm.
and movement.
Oh,
You throw that in, and it creates a level of social coherence and connection, and actually can lead to ecstasy,
right,
joy, and spiritual experiences. And so, those of us who are living in kind of isolated communities and not really connecting and just being individuals,
right.
all the power is with those who actually sing and meet together. So anyway, it's just an interesting thing.
Interesting. Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
you know, about culture in South African culture, traditional culture here, which is still very much alive, is totally a group singing. Weddings, funerals, weekends, any celebration, any small thing will be sung about collectively in the moment.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and that creates in South African terms Ubuntu, which is a sense of I am that we are,
Mm.
as
Yeah.
opposed to it's all about me and individualism, like we are interconnected.
Yeah. 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 That's great. And that's a very, I think it's a glue that holds together that tribal community. And I
Yeah.
mean that on the small, in the United States, in America, in the Americas, I should say, um, pre-colonization, that was part of the main tradition
Mm.
for the culture that was here was group singing, chanting at all levels. If you're doing a spiritual sweat or something like that, there's likely going
Mm.
to be singing, each person singing or chanting their dream or their experience that they're having, uh, and it's still present, but it's definitely not a cultural phenomenon right now. It's separated to entertainers or somebody entertaining. But those cultures are still that still exist, still chant and still do that kind of work, where they get together and they drum and they dance and they sing. It's still a thing, and they're telling a story in their song. But as the quote unquote American culture, it's definitely regulated to being more of a pocket, I think, and not being part of a community by singing. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody will have a comment that'll say you're crazy. But I think tribally, that's where people, started this bind. That's, you're part of the tribe. You sing, you talk, you express, you have a story to tell. It's like a powerful individual experience with the group, with the tribe or whatever, which definitely, and I'm not completely clear on how the culture is in South Africa as far as how much tribal influence is still there, like the very early tribal forms. But I would imagine that it comes from that. It wasn't ever lost. It was part of this tribal lore of like singing, dancing, and connecting with your community, and it never got lost.
But that's really strong here.
Yeah.
Tribal culture, super strong.
Well, you mix in that because you said the religious organizations here that do the singing and swaying and moving, chanting, that religious connection is a direct connection to the tribal, way of being, to connect through the spirit, to connect. It's all part of the same storyline. So there's a lot of movement in the United States to not be religious. To be an atheist or not believer, but then that does lock them in to less avenues for expression, or less, let's say, community need. There's not somebody saying, well, then you need to make sure you're singing your story. You still need to tell people about yourself and in a way that's poetic or something. I'm not sure if that follows the same lines, but people get locked into their little worlds and don't want reference to the universe at large or whatever. I think it can be very debilitating, a very debilitating thing to not have an avenue of expression, of singing, of speaking, that sort of thing. Is that something that you have to work with as well? Is it not necessarily religious, but like a spiritual, spiritual places for people where they're able to connect spiritually with whatever their goal might be, community-wide or personally?
Yeah, that's been a really interesting challenge for me because I work with people from most continents in the world,
Right.
and from many different religions and atheists and everyone. What's common for all of us? So I'm even cautious about using the word spiritual. So I'll use words like conscious or being awake, or being aware that you're aware, or being deeply present. In my group work, I definitely, absolutely try and create spaces for people to be present from within their more fundamental nature, as opposed to just being up inside the busy little head in the kind of least connected parts of the ego. Like as we just take a breath right now, and welcome in a little bit more presence, what happens. And so absolutely, as part of the groups that I work with, we use singing and speaking and space and silence to slow down and ask ourselves, like, if I don't need to operate at the same speed, and allowing in these pauses, what happens to awareness or consciousness now? So for all the listeners, let's just dial up our sense of presence. So another way of doing this in this moment is to feel our bodies in the seat. Perhaps you're walking, then feel feet or legs. So we're bringing awareness into the body, but also we're busy with a massive pause. Pause. We're pausing and almost becoming vibrantly present and aware. And noticing the gaps between thoughts and words. And it's naughty on a podcast to leave giant spaces of air.
Yeah, like, so what's going to happen?
Feed me. I need more facts right now at high speed. You're breaking the rules, Jeremy. Do not do that. But what happens if we slow down? And so how was that for you? I mean, you're a podcast facilitator in this moment, and for your guest to then slow it down like that, is that comfy? Is it okay? Yeah, tell me what your feeling was.
Works for me. You know, for me, you know, technique is paramount, and application and timing almost doesn't matter because you're always breathing. So any point in time that I can be reminded to take a deep breath is a good time to take a deep breath, to pause, to examine, to reflect. You know, these are always good reminders, kind of like a sticky note. So I think anybody that's listening or watching, now is a good time to look at the sticky note, take a moment, look at the space between the words, and pause.
That's it, exactly. So, and that sense of pause is really, really useful if you're one of those people that tends to overexpress. It all comes out. This pause can be the difference between ruining a relationship or having a big fight. So just introducing this sense of, call it spaciousness, into things gives us a ton more choices. It's just one of the approaches. Alongside the somatic work is also this level of presence.
Right.
Or pause, or space.
I think what I'm working with in speaking, and I have to listen to myself after I do it, one of these videos many times, is the elimination of you know, not having that extra bit in there because it doesn't really need to be there. It's definitely, just did it. It's part of those like chain of thought that goes in, that, you know, in the voice, these extra utterances that don't need to necessarily be in place where they're at. It's something I'm trying to be more conscious of, giving more clear thought, and then taking that moment between the words to not have to say, you know, like is a big one.
Yeah. And getting rid of, so the term for that, just for the listeners, is working on your filler words, and so filling up the space with ums and likes and whatever else, as opposed to just take a breath and then come in clearly with your next thought.
Yeah. Powerful. Again, and it is that pause that allows you a place to stand mentally to approach the next question or a response to whatever someone's saying. Yeah, absolutely. As far as clients, have you had pretty good reaction as far as what clients have experienced outside of after the course? Getting good feedback for that?
I get I get like a ton of feedback, and I'm just going to say this work does change lives. I mean, I believe in it fundamentally, and I observe this happening all the time. And really, within a few sessions, people can turn around blushing and red ears or stutters. I mean, stutters are a bit more complex, but generally ingrained patterns that you thought you'd have for life. You know, I'm that guy that walks into the room and I blush and I start losing my words. Within one or two one-on-one sessions, that can be turned around. The blushing pattern, for example, and then one will be deeply working on that unfreezing and allowing a sense of dynamism and confidence to come in. So generally, I get people who respond even in the beginning of the course, within the first 2 weeks, people start shifting, and by the end of it, people have done a ton of shifting. But also, I realistically say to everyone, you've been developing this particular set of wiring for 45 years or however long you've been alive, or 60 years, because I work with people of all ages. So there's a big there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of application. Like, I still work with these techniques all the time. I still use the somatic and down regulation techniques all the time when I'm facilitating. I basically say to everyone, really, always be regulating, always be redirecting and bringing yourself into alignment when communicating. And I just don't stop, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
It's more like having a way to approach the world at large and yourself, having a method. I always just say, when you're born, you're not really handed a book on how to live life. You have to find it. And when you find a technique that allows you to live a more genuine, clear life, go with it, you know. And it's an active thing. You learn it, and you're very good at it. Somebody that's never heard of it, it's going to take a little bit for them to kind of let it intercede into all aspects of their life. But I would imagine you get pretty good response. People feel very inhibited, and not being inhibited would be a really nice feeling, you know, as well. Any do you do any kind of outreach with places that have experienced large traumatic events like earthquake victims, that sort of thing? Do you do any kind of outreach to groups or issues, global issues, any kind of thing like that, where you offer services out for somebody or people that are affected by large-scale traumatic events?
Yeah, I don't have time, certainly at the moment, to kind of travel and do trauma work at that level. But I do community work here from time to time, where, I do, lead free community work in disadvantaged communities or organizations. I've done a lot of that.
Yeah, that's very important
a lot of
work,
trauma work.
for
Yeah, and
sure.
it's like deeply moving as a facilitator, and important for us to get out of our bubbles,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
serve.
yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, that's kind of what we do as facilitators of a process. Is, we're serving the community at large.
Mm.
I know a lot of people in the moment of trauma, it's really hard to affect, change, because the situation is really low chakra. It's very survival oriented.
Mm.
The needs are there. It's more of an after, now that you've had this experience, where are you at? Find the stillness, all that. Um, as far as in the news, are you seeing a greater increase in people's sense of well-being, sense of communication, or are you seeing that your services are needed more? The more that you see things going on in the world.
Yeah, I would just say that more. My practice is generally impossibly booked up,
Right.
and it's full. There's just like, I think a lot of, certainly where I am, wellness practitioners are generally very booked. I think
Okay.
anxiety and trauma levels and psychological issues and so on are really on the rise.
Yeah.
And definitely one area that has proven to be an area that just needs a lot of help is, I'm going to say, with youth, especially youth that weren't able to socialize during their teen years. There's a ton of social anxiety pouring through now, where essential developmental processes didn't take place. And so I hope to have more time to do more work with teens, to help them with resiliency and social interaction skills, and
Yeah.
to move through that, because they will have patterns that will set them up to essentially be introverts,
Right.
or awkward or uncomfortable for the rest of their lives. I work with the adult versions of where those teens are starting now all the
Right.
time, and you could have almost a generation of kids that are all like that, and it's not ideal. It's
Yeah.
not great for them, and it's not great for the planet.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the pandemic saw a lot of like forced isolation.
Mm.
And prior to that, it was really people that were just really heavy on computer use or gaming or something like
Exactly.
that, where they had the interaction over the microphone, and that's it, or just Twitter or something. Uh, but then the world was forced into this isolation sphere of
Mhm.
approach to community. Community was basically isolated. I called it the age of Aquarius, jumpstart, basically, because it
Mhm.
was like these pockets of, you know, of communication bubbles all over the place where nobody's really connected, but they're all connected, you know,
Mm.
on that mental sphere. And being in person with people is just the benefits outweigh doing anything, in tele world and Zoom calls or whatever.
Mm.
But definitely a generational swing towards non-physical connection
Yeah.
is definitely happening here, and I would say um, in the next decade it'll be a very large amount of people that are needing more of what you do. You know, helping people
Mm.
communicate with other people just on the simple,
Mm.
basic lines. Opening up those locks. Um, so yeah, I imagine that that's keeping you pretty busy. you know, um,
Mm.
and is this something that you feel like maybe training others to do your style or technique is in the future? Something that you're looking at?
Perhaps, yeah. My more immediate priority is to deepen in the research. So really
Right.
get the research out so we can really understand the scale and depth of the problem and the nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that leading from that is the book which I've begun working
Oh,
on, really detailing both the techniques but also mapping out the territory. Spent a lot of time mapping out all the minutiae of how these voices look or how these self-expression systems look in individuals.
yeah,
And yeah, it is a book that needs to be written and put out. And
yeah.
so that'll be probably the simplest way that I can get the information out en masse.
Right. And talk more about the book.
Yeah, so the book really is just I don't have a title for it yet, but it really covers this whole territory. I've learned to sit with people because I just work with both a lot of one-on-ones, but also work with a lot of groups. And the patterns immediately become obvious. Like I've said, for example, we've got our too much voices or our too little voices, or we've got hybrid voices or a combination of the two. The same, I'll often, when I'm working with a group, for example, I'll say, well, let's work with polyvagal theory style, looking at nervous systems. When you are under threat, do you tend to a fight response? First to fight? Do you tend to flee? In other words, I'm going to leave the argument, leave the room, leave the relationship. Do you freeze?
Right.
Total freeze, nothing comes out, or potentially blah, 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 words come out weird, you get all dizzy, but you're frozen. Or are
Mm,
you a pleaser?
mm,
So a fawn, Fawn, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Most of us are a combination of those.
mhm.
But what happens to you when you need to communicate and you're under threat? So that would just be for example, a chapter within this is looking at your system because let's just say there are remedies for each of those. There are remedies for people whose systems tend to freeze, and there are remedies for the fighters and the fleers and the pleasers. And so that's just a kind of to give you an idea. I've got many, many, many chapters to this thing of perspectives for looking at the self-expression system, the communication system that each of us has, and then how we can unlock the pattern that's holding us back, and then basically blossom or bloom and really allow our radiant selves to express with the world. And so that's where the techniques come in, and those techniques cover a series of different areas.
Yeah. And so that's great. The freeze and fawn, I haven't heard of those, but the fight or flight, I think that's people are really aware of. Fight or flight, they've heard that.
Yeah.
But freeze and fawn, definitely very important and obvious responses right?
Mm.
Freezing, that's definitely something people do. And
Mm.
fawning, the pleasing, it sounds very complex, but the pleasing portion of that as a response
Yeah, it's a,
to
mm.
somebody to basically want to go along with the crowd. Is that's kind of what that is?
Well, I had an embedded fawn response and a freeze response. So my fawn response would involve saying what the other person wants to hear,
Mm,
in conflict, pacifying the other person, doing whatever to reduce the conflict and make it safe, but completely compromise myself and not say how I actually feel.
right.
There'll be a ton of listeners. Whoever's listening to this, do write in, or comment, if you're a phoner, a fighter, a pleaser, or a freezer. Let
Right.
us know. But there'll be a ton of phones there. There
Really.
always are.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a ton of pleasers out there who are betraying themselves and peacemaking in their
Right.
families 24/7.
Yeah. Yeah. Because fight or flight is just okay. You know, you either run away from a conflict or a traumatic space, or you fight it.
Mm.
Um, I love that. That's great. Yeah. Fawn or freeze. What a great adaptation there. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's like just part of the known lingo, but definitely having that structure to it of understanding and responses is very important. Yeah.
Yeah, this is out of the complex PTSD literature, but
Okay.
adapted for self-expression systems. So,
I see.
everything
Yeah.
I'm talking about here is fairly rigorously backed up
Yeah.
by trauma theory and so on.
Right.
However, there just hasn't been that much focus on communication and communication systems,
Right.
and so that's, I suppose, what I'm weaving together is all the complex PTSD and trauma theory and psychological theory, but around self-expression
Yeah.
and somatic theory and so on.
Okay. And if
Yeah.
somebody wanted to get started with you, what's the best way for them to contact you? How can they find you?
I am very findable on the internet. Just search for Jeremy de Tolly. I'm a Jeremy de Tolly on Instagram, jeremydetolly.com on the web. Those are probably two of the easiest. I would just go to jeremydetolly.com and cruise the website.
Yeah.
There's a ton of info there, all about everything from the group work I do through to one-on-one coaching, communication coaching. There's also, I'm under Jeremy de Tolly on YouTube. So there's free content there, all about this stuff. You can start to dive into this universe if it
That's
lights you
great.
up, or if it's calling you. You can find out a little bit about this work there.
Yeah, I'll have your website linked into the description as well. Um, and that you work with people all over the world, so you can do video calls with people wherever they may be.
Yeah, I work with people from Pacific time through to the Far East, through to
Yeah,
Africa and Europe. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Excellent. Well, it
yeah.
sounds like you do exceptional work unlocking people's traumas and freeing them from the binds that hold them in through communication, which is just great. I think
Thank you,
it's
Nick.
definitely needed worldwide, get
Mm.
your message out there. And I definitely appreciate having you on the show today. It was really good to finally connect and make this happen.
Thank you for making time for me, Nick. And it's just to everyone listening, thank you for listening. You made it all this way to the end of the podcast. I really appreciate you listening. And yeah, I just wish you well with your voice and your self-expression. Yeah, it's been a treat to be here. Thank you, Nick.
Hey, thank you, Jeremy. Okay, take care.
Mm. You too.
Yep. Bye bye.